is down here, and we're seeing about an 8% unemployment rate in journalism. So if you're looking at any career, and as you hear people rotate, as you walk to different teachers and listen, you might want to ask, what's the percentage of unemployed people in that field? And in journalism, it's creeping up there. It's not as bad as an artist with an almost 10% unemployment rate, which is pretty tough. If you're coming out of college, you want to know that you will have a job waiting for you. And so one thing I want to talk to you about is how you would try to get a job in journalism after you graduate. This is a painting that I did in the snow, because when we were originally getting together to meet, it was February 27th, and Career Day was canceled because of the snow. And this is the homepage for my website, City Serene, and a snowman in my area. But one of the things that I do is I interview people like NOAA, a scientist from NOAA who's up in the mountains talking about climate change. I also write about art, as I mentioned, and about writing. So that's my website. And now we're going on to what I just talked about, using smartphones, where we're looking at about 78% reporting using a device to get news in the last week, and 3/4 of Americans under the age of 30 getting their news daily. So these statistics show that people are really big news consumers, and this would be throughout your life, which is why it's an interesting field to be in, because people want to read news until, you know, they're 100. Okay. We talked about Twitter and Snapchat, and what was the one that, Instagram and social media becoming an important, does anybody, you mentioned cable news, like, is that where you watch sports? So does anybody watch like 24-hour cable programming at home? That's another area where there's a lot of careers, reporting on sports. If you're not playing sports, writing about sports is a good option, or talking about sports. If you're a woman, you might be more willing to talk about schools, health, and lifestyle on social media. But the bottom line is that Americans across all ethnic groups get their news at least several times a week and enjoy following the news at similar levels. Has anyone heard of Amazon? Mm-hmm. Okay, do you get books from Amazon? They're kind of I don't know how to pronounce this, behemoth. They're just a giant corporation, $60 billion in revenue annually from digital media, with its entrepreneur Jeff Bezos predicting that home delivery services of goods will be tied into this whole trend. So in addition to getting your books at home, you can have things like your groceries delivered, and it's all about digital media delivering not only news but products to you. Right now there's about 5,000 full-time professionals in journalism, 500 digital news outlets, and professional newsroom employment, I mentioned, is on the decline. It's actually up from 6.4 in 2012 to more like 8% now. And you can see that digital news organizations, there's only 30 of them that account for about 3,000 jobs around the globe. Has anyone heard of the Huffington Post? Huff News? They apparently have a very large foreign presence, so that would be another option, is to consider going overseas to report. And we have local television reaching 9 out of 10 adults, and with nearly 300 local stations changing hands for $8 billion in revenue a year. So we're talking about huge business here, $60 billion from the Amazon estimates. And we're looking dramatic changes that are happening in terms of news across the board now. So, okay, finding a job in journalism. Is this getting boring? Okay, how do you get a job in journalism? First of all, most newspapers today do not hire people who have not been trained as journalists, because there's all kinds of ethical questions that you would have to know. You have to be accurate, you have to be trained to write, you are responsible for everything that you say because people's reputations are at stake. All of this training comes with learning about it in school. So after you graduate from Enloe High School, for example, and you've worked on the Eagle's Eye, you might want to consider getting an internship at the News and Observer or one of the local journals. And how would you do that? You would want to have a resume, and you would want to state what your goals are and your work experience. And it's tough. You've got to be prepared possibly to relocate to a very small town and start on a newspaper maybe in Alabama or in rural North Carolina and work your way up. And that is regardless of whether or not you're going into print or broadcasting. You're going to have to start in a small media outlet and learn how to report. When we started in the 80s, computers were just beginning to emerge on the scene. They were called video display terminals. We laid out our copy with a X-Acto knife and wax onto sheets of paper, and then that was at a small press. And you can see that the New York Times in 1965, they had 800 printers. It was just, before computers, it was really almost primitive the way that newsprint was laid out. If you go to graduate school in journalism like I did at Northwestern in Chicago, the first thing that they do is they take you over to the beautiful printing press of the Chicago Tribune, and you see what it's like to watch newspapers come off a giant machine. Like, it's astonishing and inspiring, and shows you how news is disseminated so quickly. Just the amount of effort that's required to get a newspaper into your hands every day is such an astonishing feat of magic that I'm amazed every day that I read a newspaper like the New York Times, that they're able to produce something this quickly. So what would a newsroom look like? I'm going to just go past the statistics.
3 minutes left.
3 minutes, okay. Okay, so in the 3 minutes, what do journalists need? They need to be intelligent and well-informed, which I think you all are. You need to be able to write. You have to be committed and dedicated, and you need to be accurate and fair. So when I was going to be here on the 27th, it snowed a whole lot. And the New York Times and the USA Today predicted there was going to be a tidal wave of snow, the biggest snowstorm in the century. New York City shut down its subway system, the first time in 100 years. That's a huge story. If you were a reporter that day, you would have a hard job ahead of you. You would have all the city officials and also engineers gathering for a press conference talking about what the potential safety implications are for a major snowstorm. You'd also have to worry about whether or not people had heat and electricity. And you might want to know something like whether or not the chicken curry from the takeout was still running. In the newsroom, your editor would divide you up and you would be sent out, and that would be your beat for the day. So the person covering Mayor de Blasio would be over at City Hall writing a story about how government was handling a major shutdown, whereas you would be over trying to figure out on your phone for the next couple hours whether or not the chicken curry was getting through to the people that were stuck indoors for 5 days. You would only have maybe 4 or 5 hours to get all the information that you needed for the story before you came back to your desk at noon, had to write a story in maybe 2 hours and file it, because a newspaper deadline is hard and fast. This printing press has to go, you know, on schedule, and there are no lates. So that's where you get trained, and it's pretty exciting work. I hope you all will consider looking into it at NMO. And thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.